This program is part of the Infinite Potato Alliance. Visit us at infinitepotato.com.
I'm Shane Thomas and this is Analysing Doctor Who. I'm joined by Chris Kocher and Ken Deep, and we are here to analyse the legend of Ruby Sunday. And if you have any thoughts on our thoughts or anything else Doctor Who based, you can email us at analysingdoctorwho@gmail.com. Okay, Chris, so for this episode, if we just start with your rating out of 10, please.
I would say 8.
Okay, your rating, Ken?
I'm going to go with the same number, 8.
Okay, my rating will be 7. So, Ken, if you start us off with what you liked the most from this.
I thought that the episode had a really polished nature to it. It seemed like more so than a few of Russell's scripts earlier this year. It looks like this one's been brewing for a while. It had a sort of an excellent scope to it. And, of course, you get down to the cliffhanger. It was as dark and mysterious as a Doctor Who fan would really want. It really gets very intense, and we're starting to get some questions answered, and, you know, the brain starts spinning because you're thinking, oh, how long has this been going on, you know? And I thought that it was a long overdue return of a villain that I'm sure, all like or dislike.
All right, Chris, we'll move on to you. What from this do you like the most?
What I like the most is that we're finally starting to learn some of the answers to the questions that we've had all season. You know, what's the deal with Susan Twist? Although I feel like there's still more we need to know about that. Obviously, we found out who's the one who waits. Some big questions, obviously, left for the finale. But hopefully those will be answered, like who's Ruby's mom, who's Mrs. Blood. I feel like we got enough for the first part that we didn't learn everything, and I feel like we're going to get a lot of good answers in the finale as well, I hope.
I totally agree with you. The one thing I don't think we're going to get an answer on, and this could just be my own curveball, I bet you we don't find out about Mrs. Flood. I bet you that's something that Russell's dangling, that he's going to keep going. Why dole out all the answers, right? There's no rush. Mm-hmm. We know there's another season coming.
And the fact that he knew that there was a second season coming and was pretty much almost writing them both together would give him that opportunity to say, all right, I don't need to even give away all of the answers here. I can wait until next season to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I could be completely wrong, and it turns out that Mrs. Flood is Sutekh. But you don't necessarily have to do all the reveals right now. Mrs. Flood may have one little spark of an idea in the finale that allows the plot to move forward, but still allows her to be a mystery, and it only makes us question more, like, how would she know these answers? That seems like something that Russell might do.
I like that. I like that a lot, Ken, actually.
Yeah, what specifically from this episode I like the most was the monologue that reveals Sutekh, almost the harbinger.
He is hidden in the howling void. He is hidden within the tempest.
What?
He has braved the storm and the darkness and pain. And he whispered to the vessel.
Who has?
All this
What do you
time
mean?
he whispered, and delighted and seduced, and the vessel did obey. For none should be more mighty and none should be more wise than the king himself.
Harry, what are you doing?
And the Lord of Time was blind and vain and knew nothing.
What is happening in there?
It's Harriet. It's like...
She's possessed.
Kate, who is she?
Harriet, you met her.
Yeah, I know, but what is her full name?
Harriet Harbinger.
Harbinger.
There is the toy maker, the god of games. There is Trickster, the god of traps. There is Maestro, the god of music. There is Reprobate, the god of spite. There is the Mara, the god of beasts. And the threefold deity of malice and mischief and misery.
Warning. Manifestation.
There are gods of skin and shame and secrets. There is insensity, the god of disaster, and her children who doubt and dread. And standing on high is the mother and father and other of them all. Whatever it is, here it comes. For the god of all gods has returned, and his names are many. His name has been Set, and Seth, and Sithafar. And his one true name forevermore is
Genesis Lanier plays Harriet. That, I think, is one of the best monologues I've ever seen on this show. The quality of the line delivery, the intonation, the cadence, it was almost like someone on stage doing like a one-woman show, and it was done with this sufficient gravitas to really, really hold you. They film her great. They stick a dead center of the frame, slow zoom in. It was really compelling, just great bit of acting. And in addition to that, just throughout, because we've never seen her before, from the moment she got introduced, there is a feeling of she's going to be important. I don't know how important, I don't know exactly at what point, but she didn't feel like a background character. She felt significant to an extent, and when they reveal how significant, I think that was masterfully done. Like, it was about 2 years ago now, and we did a podcast of top 5, I think it was speeches, we entitled it, and if we redid that show, I might have to find a space for this. I always try and avoid knowing too much. It's not easy, but trying to avoid everything I can about Empire of Death. Tried to avoid everything I could about Legend of Ruby Sunday, but I did catch a glimpse of a review that someone said about there was something Neil Gaiman about the conclusion, and that speech in particular felt that's the kind of thing that Gaiman would write. Harriet talks about Sutekh being the mother and the father and the other. That mystical, like, dangerous fairy tale is very,
do you
very
think Russell's
Gaiman.
been watching Good Omens? Maybe Russell's taking a little inspiration from these godlike characters and wanting to tell that type of story.
Possibly. I mean, also he has the budget too, and it's carried off really great because you cross-cut between Unit and the TV studio, wherever Susan Tried is doing her, doing, what do they call them Apple speeches that Steve Jobs used to do?
It's like a keynote address.
That was it, yeah. Where Susan Tried does her Apple keynote address. You cross-cut between the two locations, and at the moment that Sutekh's being revealed and the Doctor realizes but doesn't want to acknowledge it, Ncuti sells the moment brilliantly because he connotes such terror on his face. So even though people like myself and plenty of fans watching were like, I don't know who this is, and we'll get more into Sutekh, you can see just by Ncuti's reaction that this is something serious. This is not a minor villain of the week. I even liked how early in the episode, I think Morris talks about Unit when they were kind of spying on Susan, and saying how Unit isn't detecting any alien signals, and it shows that Sutekh is clearly more than alien. It's almost an inference that Unit is actually ill-equipped for this current version of the show with these villains that Russell's created. Maybe that's something that will come more to the fore in the likely spin-off. Chris, if I come to you on what from this you like the least?
What I like the least, I honestly had a hard time trying to determine what I like the least, but what I will say is, and this is a common problem with a lot of finale stories especially, is it just seemed like a little too frenetic and felt like some scenes you could have had a few more seconds time to breathe, Like one of the scenes that I really liked was the very brief scene with the Doctor and Mel.
That thing killed him. Not you.
What was it? And Ruby's mother, why was she pointing at me?
Finished? Now stop grizzling and fix it. Because if Susan is your granddaughter, then she might be the key to this. Now come on.
almost like a quiet character moment in the middle of everything. Like, I felt like if we had like maybe another couple of those sprinkled in there, like maybe it would have seemed less fast-paced, but it almost felt like you didn't have a lot of time to breathe. Now, that's obviously what Russell was doing when he wrote it and when it was made. So if that's the case, then great job. I mean, it was hard to look away, but I felt like, maybe you could have used like a little more breathing space, just a little bit. But that was the best I could come up with, guys. I really did like this episode a lot.
I actually totally agree with you. This is part of the reason why I gave it 7, not an 8, particularly when I rewatched it, is that full of energy, full of urgency, this episode. But there are character beats that slightly get overshadowed by just the demands of the plot, and this is an issue. Not an issue. Like, this is why I have some sympathy with Russell, because this episode is, I think 44 minutes. This episode needs to be an hour.
And the next one is.
Yes, and I suspect Russell wrote an hour and then frantically, him in the script, and then with the rough cut, editing and chopping to get it down. Because if this was just a Disney Plus thing, if you imagine a world where a Time on Doctor is not on the BBC and it's just on Disney Plus, I suspect this would have been an hour, because you don't have the same restrictions. But
Yep.
He is restricted by what he has on the BBC. Focus on the problems with Disney Plus and the American influence, and no, this has got nothing to do with Disney. If it had just been Disney and more American, I think we would have gotten about an hour episode, and I think the episode would have been better for it. I immediately felt it when Ruby and the Doctor in unit, Ruby's like, oh, the tape of when I was dropped off at the church, I've got a tape of that. They then go home, or she goes home with Rose, and it cuts to them in Carla's room, and she's taken out a box and said, here's the tape, and there was no Ruby coming back through the door. Hi, Mum. Hi, this is Rose. Oh, so where have you been, or what have you been up to, and nothing like that, which is the kind of thing you'd expect. It felt like we came in midway into the scene, and I suspect we probably did. I suspect they filmed more, but because of time, it did feel certain scenes, if you look at the transition between scenes, just jarred a little bit, and I understand why. I don't have a solution, or here's what Russell should have done instead. I don't have that. I totally empathise with his position. I think it's a very tough position to be in. I think they did the best they could with the time they had, but as Ken's already said, they have made a point of saying next week's, I don't think it's an hour, I think it's 54 or 55 minutes.
Yeah, it's just shy of an hour.
Yes, and those extra 10 minutes could be critical. I kind of wish this had in it, because it is literally you may not even need 10, you could probably need another 6 or 7, might have been enough. But I definitely agree with Chris's point that didn't kill the episode by any stretch, but it just hurt it a little bit as a whole episode in one. So, Ken, what from this do you like the least?
Russell has a track record of having these high-paced 2-part finales. He's done it in the past, and he sacrifices. In Game of Thrones, they talk about jetpacking. When you rush between scenes, jetpacking, because the show and the books kind of take their time, where, it takes a really long time to go to cross this kingdom or cross this land. And all these little stories take place during that journey. And then all of a sudden, at one point in Game of Thrones, when they were trying to wrap it up, they simply leapt from place to place, which seemed very odd. And Doctor Who is doing the same thing, and has. It's not like this episode stands on its own with this, but Russell has traditionally jetpacked in his finale to try to tell a larger story. And to Chris's point, it lacks, and it always has lacked, those little character moments that make Doctor Who so wonderful. However, Chris pointed out very rightly, the scene with Mel is genius. And on top of that, it's metaphorical of the old series talking to the new series. And literally, Mel tells the new Doctor, put on your big boy pants. And
it's interesting also to think that Mel obviously had one of the more difficult doctors, I guess you could say, from the original series. Love the Sixth Doctor, love Colin Baker, but, as a character, especially in the TV series at that time, he can be pretty spiky. So you kind of felt like she was used to dealing with a doctor of that kind and kind of knew how to steer him the right way to get him back on track, which I thought was a really interesting character moment for her and kind of goes along with how Mel is kind of being redeemed a little bit in her appearances now, because she was not well loved when she was on the original show for various reasons that we don't need to rehash now. But, I mean, you feel like Russell is almost giving her like a redemption arc in a way that people are like, well, maybe Mel wasn't so bad after all, or, you know, maybe she could do more than just scream all the time.
The thing that you pointed out, I hadn't really thought of this, was when you think about how Colin would have reacted to opposing a god compared to Ncuti. And again, she kind of is saying to the doctor, I know what's inside of you when necessary, because Colin will be this brash and who do you think you are kind of attitude about the whole thing.
I mean, the main issue with Mel is that she was terribly written character. She was terribly written, and in all the interviews that Bonnie Langford has now done since returning, without obviously shoving that era of the show in front of a moving train, you can hear very clearly that, yeah, it was shit, and I'm enjoying this so much more. She's getting to do what she never got to do first time around. That she was a computer programmer who never touched a keyboard.
Right. I mean, unfortunately, she was there during a difficult time in the show's history, and also during a time when it was written more like a pantomime than it was like an actual, like, even drama meant for, you know, young adults. I mean, it was very cartoonish at the time, and unfortunately that's the character that she had. Maybe if she had been there the following season when they kind of adulted it up a little bit, when Ace was there and when the Seventh Doctor got a little darker, maybe she would have had a different character. But unfortunately, she was there, as you say, Shane, during that shitty period where there was so much chaos behind the scenes that, I mean, she probably did the best she could do with what she had, but she didn't get much to work with.
And, you know, now with the show being written by people who understand what it's all about, and I'm not saying that the writers in the 80s didn't understand it, but, you know, let's face it, Russell and Moffat and Chibnall and many of the writers who currently write on the show, they come from a fandom of the show, and so there is this thought in their head that, well, if I'm going to have a classic character come back, I'm going to give them something to chew on instead of just saying, what is that, doctor, and then scream. Like, the appeal to someone like Bonnie Langford is, well, you're going to be a spy in this, and you're going to tell the doctor off a little and tell him he's got to, you know, get his act together or whatever. And they're like, damn, I'm actually given something to chew on here, and this is great.
Yeah, the key thing, she has a reason to be there. Ironically, given what I said I liked the most, what I liked the least, as far as an initial moment, was the actual reveal of Sutekh. Because I'm of the generation that don't have familiarity with this character. The build is great with the speech and the monologue, and it's Murray Gold's music as well over the top, should mention that. Brilliantly done. And then they reveal that the FX is not good on this bit. It's as if they spent all their money on like the rights for the songs they used in Rogue. Are you saving all the money for next week? Because that FX they look like the dogs from Ghostbusters, but just like less impressive. Like they built this up, and the character may go on to be, we haven't seen him really do anything yet. Sutekh arrives, and I don't think, oh shit, I'm kind of like, oh, it's only like a few seconds, so they can turn this around. But the just moment of the reveal was in itself underwhelming, because I didn't think the effects were great. And I know there's more money, but still not. It's still a rich show. The analog that I would use is apparently the new Star Wars show, The Acolyte, apparently had a $180 million budget. And this won't even have a fifth of that, I don't think.
Yeah, probably for the whole season.
Oh, that's what I mean. I'm not talking about this episode. I mean the whole series. It felt like, okay, nothing wrong with being ambitious, but if you realise you can't do it, then just scale it back. You don't need something massive and grand to be like intimidating. There's other ways to do it. I mean, maybe have nothing. Have it almost like just the disembodied voice come from the TARDIS itself.
Well, especially with that voice, it's iconic.
Yeah, and the smoke around it. You could have just done that.
I'm normally one of those people that's all for re-envisioning something, but in this case, I think they would have been better served trying to make Sutekh look like an updated version of what we saw in Pyramids of Mars, rather than try to entirely reinvent the monster, the look. The original one was striking, and it worked. So
it'll be interesting to see in the finale whether they do have like a more humanoid version of Sutekh, where it does sort of more resemble what we saw in the Pyramids of Mars. I think maybe for this one, maybe they were going for the fright factor of it being this huge, scary dog head, and whether it worked or not, Shane has a point there. But it's hard to have character interactions between the Doctor and a big, scary, amorphous dog head thing. So I do wonder if they'll scale it down and have a more humanoid Sutekh, or whether it will be through people like Harriet where that communication happens, or whatever.
We haven't, although they've been, they're holding it close to the vest as far as photos from next week, although they have revealed a bunch today. We haven't seen any Sutekh photos. The theme, I should say, because it really isn't an arc, but the theme for much of Russell's Disney Plus material has been gods. The idea of using gods, I'm curious to know if he was influenced by, like you're saying, a little bit of stuff with good omens and things like that. Is there something he's dying to get out of him, utilizing that to try to tell a story about gods, making gods out to be that they are super powerful and they're more powerful than humans, but they're not infallible? It is kind of a direction we might see. One of the questions, Shane, you asked was, what do you like least about this episode? Next week's episode is what I don't like about this one. I'm nervous because quite often the setup is better than the resolution. Part of it always is the build-up. We're our own worst enemies as fans, is building up to what we're expecting to see and have revealed to us in the next episode. And what happens a lot of times, like with the Time Lords, and time passes and we accept it at face value after a while. And that's also like people who are really kind of being like, this isn't my Doctor Who. It will be in 5 years' time.
One, we've already mentioned it a bit, but if we focus in on the character of Sutekh, who is, it seems to be, the big bad of this series. Now, some people will not have been familiar with this character until last week. Chris, obviously you and then Ken, because you're both familiar with Sutekh. How big a problem is this character for the Doctor? Because the Doctor's reaction seems to indicate this is a big problem.
I mean, it is a huge problem. I actually went back the last couple days and rewatched the Pyramids of Mars. I mean, I went back and it was interesting because I did see some comments from fans online that said, Sutekh in the original was just a really powerful alien. He wasn't really a god. But, I mean, rewatching that story now, I mean, we only know what the Doctor told us about Sutekh. And I mean, he could have been wrong. I mean, he was wrong about Sutekh being dead. And rewatching Pyramids of Mars, it's one of the few times I can remember in the classic series, and Ken, feel free to come up with other examples, but where the Doctor felt like he was truly powerless. Like, the Doctor really was completely powerless through most of his interaction with Sutekh. And I thought that was really interesting watching that back again and remembering that about that story, that I can't remember another story in the classic series where he feels like he really is being manipulated, overtaken. Like, a lot of people try to take over the Doctor's mind, and sometimes he plays along with it, but most of the time he's not really into it. Like, he really can't be taken over in that kind of way. But this episode really felt like that story. I mean, the Pyramids of Mars really felt like he was really powerless in a lot of that situation.
In Pyramids of Mars, Tom Baker is scared, and he plays it as such, and which why people really fondly remember the story, beyond the fact that it's well written and it's got incredible gothic horror moments. You have two mummies crushing someone between them. It's terrifying. I think that's why I feel the way I do about the sort of Ghostbustery monster version that we get at the very end in the modern series.
I have since, and we mentioned it, so I'm sure everyone should have figured it out by now, but the previous time Sutekh and Doctor Who was in the classic episode The Pyramids of Mars, which, if you're in the UK or have access to iPlayer, you can watch anytime. I watched the first 2 episodes. I just haven't had time to get to the final 2. I was warned going in, because from the start, there's some racism going on in this episode. But what's interesting about that is that this is now the second time, in quite a short space of time since his return, that Russell has taken an old school villain with racist origins and has brought them back. And I suspect has brought them back, and this actually is of a piece with what you mentioned about Mel, taking something from the past that was not good, or had bits about it that were not good, and has tried to essentially clean it up. So that we can still use these things in a positive way for the show in 2024. The change of Davros as well, with Davros no longer going to be in the chair anymore. We're going to put them in the show, but in a less bigoted context now. They've done it with the Toymaker. I suspect they'll do that with Sutekh, mention Davros, Mel's not less to do with like express or overt bigotry, but it's like, okay, we're going to do Mel properly this time. And there is a feeling of Russell taking stuff from the show that I'm sure he loved as a kid, realising the bits that weren't right, getting rid of all that, and then putting it for a new audience. So luckily I had missed this, but apparently a number of fans, were in the Reddit era, as it were. A number of fans had already guessed this. So some people had seen this coming, and I think Russell himself has leaned into that with the initial anagram of Susan Triad being TARDIS, and even the unit are like, yeah, we know, we got that. That's not as clever as you think it is, and I think that's clearly a meta commentary between show and fans. Some fans against Sutekh. So when the reveal comes, like, your reaction, broadly speaking, was what?
I wasn't entirely surprised because, I'd heard rumors that was who our villain was going to be. We've been talking about gods. So if we were going to pick a god out that was going to make a return, there's only a handful of them in the show's history.
I had heard somewhere that Sutekh was among the options. For instance, Omega could have been one of them. Having heard that Sutekh was one of the possibilities, I was still very excited. I used some colorful language that would not be Disney Plus approved when they actually went there. Just because people speculate doesn't mean that they're actually going to go there. Who knew that they would bring back the Toymaker?
Yeah, the other name that came up quite a bit over the past few weeks, a lot of people suggest the Trickster, because that is technically a Russell era villain, because the Trickster's appeared in Sarah Jane Adventures and was referenced in Turn Left, and the Trickster is invoked in the monologue at the start, just before Sutekh arrives. But yeah, it looks like maybe the powder will be kept around that one.
Yeah, I liked how we mentioned the Trickster. We also mentioned the Mara. I almost felt like when they were naming all these different gods, I'm like, well, here we're lining up the villains for the next 5 seasons. All right, we're dropping all these names in there so that when we come back to it in a year, the end of next season in the penultimate episode is a giant snakehead, and it turns out to be the Mara. We're like, well, we did mention the Mara last season, so, I could be wrong, but that would be kind of funny if that is what's in mind. I doubt it, but it was kind of interesting how to tie all those together. I do remember, and maybe Ken remembers this too, that in the New Adventure novels in the 90s, they really tried to take some of the villains from the classic series and kind of fit them almost into like a Lovecraftian pantheon. Like they kind of made the Great Intelligence into like one of the Lovecraft gods and this and that, and they kind of tried to, I don't think they ever mentioned Sutekh in there, but kind of interesting in a similar way that Russell in that monologue kind of takes some of the names from the classic series and Sarah Jane and elsewhere and kind of puts them into that pantheon of possible gods that we could meet in the future.
You got to remember, Russell is a child of the wilderness years. That was his time as an adult in fandom and writing, and he was a professional writer at the time. So to get him to come in on some of those things in the 90s was a big deal at the time, and he, of course, jumped right in. So, yeah, he's cut from that cloth.
And just the final thing I noticed, a lot of talk, obviously, this past week about Sutekh and the idea that they have been just hovering from the very start of this new era, maybe ever since Jodie's regeneration, because you have now, there is an explanation for why throughout this period the TARDIS has been landing in very like aggressive ways throughout, and it's trying to shake Sutekh off. These are not soft landings. These are very hard, aggressive landings. And it's not just, we have the means to do it now. It's also, there is a storytelling reason for it. And you could even argue they're saying it as an opinion. They're not trying to say it's fact, but like that explains Donna spilling the coffee in the TARDIS at the end of the Star Beast, which sends the TARDIS to the edge of the universe, Wabla Yonder, for the Doctor to end up using the soul, which opens the door up for all these creatures like the Toymaker and Maestro to come
and Mavity.
And Mavity. All that stuff. Potentially trace it back to the Star Beast.
Interesting to note that someone who went back and watched The Impossible Planet pointed out, because that was obviously the other place where we saw the Beast that was also voiced by Gabriel Wolf. Someone went back and watched that, and I had forgotten about this till they pointed it out. But when they get out of the TARDIS makes a similar groaning kind of noise that you see in this season. And the Doctor and Rose make a comment about it. And I'm not saying that Russell had planned that far back, but it's interesting to think maybe you could tie it back that far. And if Sutekh was hanging on since like series 2, like that's a long time.
I don't think it would have been planned expressly, but Russell, and he's said this many times, what he's very good at though is doing something and then coming back and saying, this thing we did like 3 years ago, we could do something with this in the story now. So I suspect he's come to it the way you have, of like, well, we didn't plan this, but that fits.
He takes advantage of these sort of serendipitous things, like you're saying. He's very good at saying, we did have a time when the TARDIS did this, so why don't we sew that together? Whereas Stephen Moffat planted seeds all over his era. Some blossomed, some bloomed, some didn't.
Yeah, so if, Chris, if we just move on to any observations we haven't made yet regarding the episode.
Can I ask you a question first, Shane?
Mm-hmm.
As someone who was not familiar with Sutekh and the Pyramids of Mars before this episode, what was it like for you to see that in the final scenes? Did it have the same kind of feeling, impact for you as somebody who that was not necessarily a villain or a concept that you had been familiar with before? Did it still hit in the same way that this is a really bad threat and there might be some really bad shit going down?
Well, it comes back to, like, in terms of how my instinctive, reflexive reaction. That's really the thing I like the most and the least. As in the build to it, I thought was tremendous. It is one of those moments, and I'm sure we have this, that there are certain scenes from Doctor Who down the years that you go back and watch. And I've watched that monologue about 5-6 times already this week, and I'm sure I'll look at it plenty more times. I think it's outstanding. So, I do think it's one of the best monologues I've ever seen on the show. And then the reveal happens, and I understand what they're going for, but I don't think they got it, at least not yet. We'll see what happens next week. But I wasn't kind of like, I don't know who this is, so why do I care? I don't need to know if you do it right. The Master in Utopia is a perfect example. Didn't know what a Master was. That is an all-time scene. And it reminded me of this. I found myself watching the scene back from Legend of Ruby Sunday, and then going back and watching that scene from Utopia. Because I think they're very, very similar in tone, even in the themes. The Murray Gold themes are not identical, but they're very similar, and what they're the impact meant to have on the audience.
But I was just curious, somebody who was less familiar with that history. But you're right, it's all in the way that it's presented, and it's presented as a huge threat. So that even if you don't necessarily know who Sutekh is when they say Sutekh, you get the feeling that it's a really bad dude that is going to be somebody that the Doctor's really going to have to be, bring out all of he can be in order to defeat that.
It's my complaint really the effects. That's it. But nothing with the writing. I have zero complaints with the writing or the acting. I think the performances around it, from the people acting and then everyone reacting, no complaints. That was excellently done.
I know you said you got the weight of the threat. Did Sutekh's mastery of manipulation, that sort of side of the character, Did you get a sense of the character's intelligence? The reason they are a threat isn't simply because they look like a dog.
Oh no, yeah, I mean that didn't come as very threatening. The threat, the main heft from that is the fact that they've been commandeering the TARDIS for how long? That alone is enough. It's like if all of a sudden you found Darth Vader flying the Millennium Falcon. It almost feels unholy.
Those two things are not supposed to meet.
Yeah, it's a feeling of you're desecrating something sacred, which can be great for storytelling, and definitely for an antagonist fits for what you would want from an antagonist. Of if they can do this, then what else can they do, and also what else will they do, and what are they prepared to do? It's like, well, if you're been fucking with the TARDIS for how long? Well, yeah, well then clearly this person ain't no joke.
Well, I mean, to those threats, your hero is only as good as your adversary. What's more of a threat than having them sort of inside the house? When you put them in the place that you feel safe, that's when their villainy really shines.
I just wanted to mention one thing, which is, what did we make of the Doctor asking Rose about her uncle, a.k.a. the 14th Doctor, who's still hanging out at his house or the noble's house or whatever we want to say, depending on whether we read the book or not, apparently. In the book, apparently, they're hanging out at the doctor's house, which I thought was really interesting. But what did we think about asking about that? I mean, is the one thing, well, it's one of the things, I should say, about the whole bi-generation thing, is that when you have like an extra doctor like hanging out there in the background, like when you don't use him, like what is he doing next week? Why is he not jumping into the action? By itself, in the giggle, it's a really great idea. It's a really great metaphor for, mental health and the doctor finally getting his shit together and all of that. But on a practical level, it just leads to questions about, why is the doctor not jumping in to help the other doctor in situations like this? I don't know if that's going to be addressed next week. I don't know if anybody cares. It'll be interesting to me whether we go there or not. I mean, it was always the question in the classic series, too, where the doctor lands on contemporary Earth and he's fighting this, that, or the other. And you always think, well, where's Unit? Like, is Unit not around? Like, are they napping? Did they take the day off?
They didn't get the call.
I think it's established at the end of the giggle that the 14th isn't just sitting around at home, but is sometimes going travelling as well, but not getting into, because there's a line about him going travelling with Rose and Donna not knowing.
We could always go in the TARDIS and find out.
Don't you dare.
You are grounded until the doctor feels better. Don't go sneaking off to Mars.
Again?
What's that mean?
Oh, no, it was just once. Oh, you were in trouble.
He took me to New York last week.
Yeah.
The Gilded Age. It was amazing.
Well, yeah.
This is just the thing with genre fiction anyway. This has been something with the MCU for so long. When so-and-so's got a threat. Where's the Hulk? Where's Saw? Where's Captain Marvel? And you can say the 14th. There's 13 others. Anyone know the fugitive Doctor's number? Can we do with her right now?
We're Doctor Who fans. We're going to have our own headcanon anyway, and we're just going to figure it out and move on.
Mike and Ken, do you have any observations that we haven't said yet?
Honestly, we've covered so much stuff, and like always happens on your podcast, someone has picked up on something because we're all kind of, coming from the same sensibilities when we're watching these stories and just kind of taking it in, So quite often you or Chris would say something, I'm like, yep, that was what I was thinking.
Okay, I actually have a few, because there are some bits of the episode we haven't had a chance to get to. I remember saying in the preview when Russell came back that I would expect to see some kind of tech billionaire commentary, and here's the episode where we got it, with the version of Susan Triad and the twist of her, and genuinely until the turn comes, being relatively nice, a nice one. And in actually her speech, which gets overshadowed by Sutekh's arrival, but she does in her speech actually acknowledge the havoc that tech bros basically have wrought on the world. There's a line very early on, which will mean, I think, nothing for people outside the UK, where Rose meets Ruby for the first time, and they're kind of almost catching up, and they're talking about Ruby Road and talking about, I met Davina. It's like, Davina McCall, and it's like, and Rose makes the point saying, I love Davina. Now that's just a throwaway line. It's fine. But what was interesting about that is that if anyone knew Davina McCall's some of her views on trans people, it was very interesting that it is the trans character saying that. I don't think that's deliberate, actually. I think that's coincidence. Given that she's in the title. We haven't really mentioned Ruby yet. It is just notable that they said when they go to the time window and bring up Ruby being left by the church, the Doctor describes it as a raw and open moment, and that's why he can't take the actual physical TARDIS back there. Suspect that'll prove important, as is the fact that Ruby was sent to the time window at the end of the episode, and it was never explained to anyone why. She says she's kind of actually off to the side, and that feels that part is being kept dry, and we'll get some more on that next week. And one of this actually was almost what I like the least. In the time window scene, when we see Ruby, we almost see a scene from the church on Ruby Road. Like they say, show, don't tell. And the problem in this, they were both telling and showing. So they're showing us what happened, and that's all fine. But you've got this constant commentary from the Doctor saying, like, oh, I'm arriving now, and I'm looking here, and it's like, you don't need to tell us. You don't need to. We can see you've arrived. This is actually somewhat distracting from the moment. Just let the scene play out without this additional commentary. Totally unnecessary.
It was almost like the Doctor and Ruby were watching Doctor Who.
Yeah,
you know?
it was. It was a bit like that.
Like they're doing one of the behind the sofa extras, where they're watching the show and commenting on the show while it's happening. Since you mentioned the time window, I really like the idea of the time window. It's sort of like a combination between the holodeck on Star Trek and the time-space visualizer from way back in the 60s, you know? I kind of like that idea of how it works, but it's never really clear, like, are they just watching what's happening? Are they actually going back there and having some influence on what's happening? I mean, I think that kind of ambiguity is what makes it interesting and what surprises the Doctor and unit when they're using it. But I really like the idea as a concept that they've been developing it since the 70s. They never told the Doctor about it. And now he looks at it and he goes, well, this is kind of primitive and pathetic, but okay, we'll use this.
Like the sort of visualizer thing, Matthew Jacobs, who wrote the 1996 movie, was telling me that one of the concepts he had in his TARDIS storyline was that you could actually, inside the TARDIS, have little moments like City on the Edge of Forever in Star Trek, you know, these little portals to other places, that you could actually travel to other places and not necessarily land the TARDIS there, that because of that dimensional thing, that you could do all these things. And so to your point, all this kind of fits that mold a bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you could...
Yeah, I like that.
If he's told you, he's probably told Russell at some point. I mean, this feels, again, we can do this now, because like we know we have the money to do so. I mean, it's just clear that it's just a visual thing. You're just visualizing it. But if you start messing around with it, then yeah, you can. But with time, and then it's complicated even more by Colonel Chidozi.
The cool thing that I read was that they didn't do this with CGI. They actually did it with holograms. And Ncuti and Millie wandering around, you know, among the holograms doing it, which I thought was really cool and really an effective visual kind of way to do it.
It's kind of aligns with the fact that it does seem where they've tried to avoid green screen, they have. Green screen seems to be, we'll do it if we have no other option, but if we do, we'll do that, because that's the same for Boom as well.
It has a better feel to it anyway, you know, when you can, if he's standing in a quarry and you actually have a physical set behind him, and you can achieve that for a low cost, why wouldn't you want it to have that feel to it? No matter how amazing CGI is, there's still that 1/100th of a percent that human beings just go, perhaps that's not real.
And as far as Ruby being put to one side and talking about how the plot was like everything was kind of fast forward, like Carla coming to unit was like, why is she coming to unit? And then leaving near the end felt like a slightly awkward, nothing to do with Michelle Greenwich's performance at all, but a slightly awkward bit of plot convenience. We need to get out of the house to get Mrs. Flood in the flat, but we can't have her actually hanging around a unit when Sutekh shows up. That felt like, I suspect that's part of the final draft. Russell's like, how do I move the chess piece? I need her there, and then I need her there, and I can't have her there. Those are probably the things that keep writers up at like 2 a.m. But when Susan comes out to give her speech, she does this kind of really awkward dance. I don't know if you notice when she comes out.
Oh yeah, I know exactly where you're going with
Yes, a lot of people outside the UK, well, that's a reference to a former Prime Minister, Theresa May, who at the Conservative Party conference. Was introduced. She came to the stage to give a speech. Dancing Queen by ABBA was playing, I think. And she did a very similarly awkward dance. Now, Susan Twist has pantomimed it a little bit. It wasn't as awkward as Susan Twist's, but it is a very unsubtle reference to that. And people who remember that period in British politics, I think that's 2018, will remember that very clearly. That's just Russell taking a none too subtle shot. One thing I did like, because there's a lot of characters in this episode, I thought his division of dialogue was quite good, and some new characters as well. Like, I didn't feel anyone was just totally there with nothing to say or do. Everyone had, even if it was just a joke or a quick line here, it almost helped us remember that, oh yeah, they're around. You have our two main characters, our Doctor and Companion, and then you have some characters, some of them are new, but you have Morris, you have Rose, you have Kate, you have Harriet, you have Colonel Chidozi, you have Colonel Ibrahim, you have Carla, you have Cherry, you have Mrs. Flood. Then you have Sutekh at the end, and you have Susan Twist, and I forgot, she'd forgotten like her main helper, and Mel. See, I almost forgot Mel. And no one felt totally sidelined. Like, some characters are obviously more important than others, but I felt every character, because of the way Russell shared the dialogue out, felt like they had a reason to be there. I don't think that's easily done. I don't think that helps the episode just about hang together. If there's a couple of characters with just nothing to say or do, I think that hurts the overall issues with the episode.
Going back on something you said a little bit earlier, that really could have fallen on its face in bringing Ruby's mom in, because you need to move her like a chess piece. She still had stuff to do and say. To his credit, he's like, okay, I have to get this character to this place. He does it, and he very easily, with all those characters, she could have just stood in the background the entire time. But he doesn't. Everybody has their part to play.
Yeah, everyone has something to do. And with all these characters, I haven't checked or counted, so I could be mistaken, but I can't remember an episode of Doctor Who that had so many black characters in it. You have the Doctor, you have Harriet, you have Rose, you have Carla, you have Cherry, you have Colonel Chidozi. That's 6. I can't, off the top of my head, I don't know, Rosa maybe? Oh, and Susan's assistant. I mean, not as many, but like we got 3 Mancunians as well. We have 3 Mancs in Colonel Chidozi, Ruby, and Rose. That's one thing they haven't cleared up with Rose. Why does Rose sound like she's from Manchester, which is where Yasmin Finney's from? Where, as far as we're aware, I don't think she spent much time in Manchester. That accent is not a Chiswick accent. No one raised in Chiswick sounds like that. And the only thing that, I don't know if this will something that will be seen next week or just in the future, but in the time window there's a mention of the Doctor about time and memory, and how memory is time, and then he's looking at things, I don't remember it being like this, why isn't my memory different? And it does potentially lean towards, if memory can change and therefore time can change, though history can change and even facts can change. There are no such thing as facts, it's just what you remember or what you decide to remember. Possibly not, but that's an interesting thing they could maybe go with. Okay, so if we end, Ken, on your MVP for the episode?
Bonnie Langford, for telling the Doctor off.
She was very good, and good to the point that I've seen a little bit of her before anyway, but if I hadn't, I would immediately like her. They introduced her to new fans, I think, very well.
And Russell has been very good bringing in characters from the past and either redeeming the character or giving them, adding to their depth. It's great to see her, and more importantly, to have a great scene where she's really kind of getting the Doctor to muster his strength.
So who's your MVP, Chris?
Apart from Ncuti, he continues to hit it out of the park. I would say I really like Susan Twist and her character. She turned what could have been just like an old school Doctor Who coincidence, that her name's Susan Twist, and the Doctor's granddaughter was named Susan, and it's sort of a twist, she really turned it into something that was memorable. She's kind of somewhere between like Elon Musk and, as you said, Theresa May, and she comes across as likable, and which is not what you expected going into it. You think she's going to turn out to be this sort of megalomaniacal, like, billionaire character, and she turns out to be likable. She obviously is some sort of harbinger or possessed by Sutekh or something like that. But it'll be interesting to see if she has any role in the finale or whether that's kind of it for her and her character. Like we had her change into like the demon kind of form. I mean, do we see her again? Does she have some kind of redemptive moment where she realizes that maybe she shouldn't have been an acolyte of Sutekh after all and helps the Doctor, or whether that we kind of have played that out? But I would like to think that having spent the whole season and even longer than the season setting her up as a character that shows up in every episode, that we kind of give her a final moment to the character in the finale. But I'll be interested to see if that happens.
Ncuti my MVP, without a doubt, on this. I really liked in this episode, because the first half or so, maybe even 60%, is like, it's detective work. We consciously see him thinking his way through this. That's because he shows up, he instigates this whole episode. This isn't actually Unit summoning him, we need your help, Doctor. This is Doctor coming to Unit. Unit were minding their own business. And the Doctor kind of brings this trouble to Unit. You see him really trying to think his way through, okay, so this is what's happening, here's what's going on. Her name's Anagram TARDIS. Oh, it's not that. It must be something else. Oh, Ruby, I think you're the other mystery about this. Let's get the tape. Let's get the time window out. And I've never seen him so far this authoritative and slightly mystical. I've never seen him be this quote-unquote Doctor. He felt Doctor-like in this, more so for the first time. Before, and this is the same, this isn't me jumping on his performance, and some people like kind of have online, and I think a lot of people forget, this is his first series. No one gets it right on their first series. No one figures it out. It is very much like learning a language. No one's fluent after one series. But I remember watching The Lodger on Matt Smith's first series, and that one was like, he's got it. He's got it. He's figured it out. This is actually his Doctor, and apparently that was filmed towards the end of his run. That's when he started to be fluent in Doctor. I'd say Peter Capaldi maybe. The Magician's Apprentice, which I think is the first episode of his second series. It's like, okay, he's got it. He's just figured it out. Before, there was some good acting. Now I feel this person is more of the Doctor. But I don't know what order this came in the filming, but I would assume it's later in the run.
And obviously it's not Ncuti's fault, but because he still had to do commitments with sex education, we had those 2 episodes where he wasn't in them very much. So I think you're right, Shane, that I think it kind of delayed him having kind of that Doctor moment, that Doctor feeling where, this is the guy, like this is finally him coming into his own. It might have happened a little sooner if he hadn't have had those commitments and been able to be a little more in a couple more episodes. And it also doesn't help that there are obviously fewer episodes per season now.
That's a very important point.
So the actor, just from an acting point of view, doesn't have that long of a runway to like take off into the role that they might have had for the previous Doctors in the new series.
You have less reps, less practice. Saying was it Gladwell 10,000 hours thing, which is bullshit anyway. But it's like he didn't have 10,000. He had 7,000. So he didn't have as much time, and I felt it was really beginning to come through. It makes you actually more excited, not just for next week, but the Christmas special and next year, because that's when I think he's really going to blossom. An interesting point as well, and I realised this in the moment. I didn't realise it was happening, and then thought, oh, hold on. We've already mentioned the scene when he gets angry at Chidosi's death, and it's Mel has to pick him out of it. It is the first time we've seen Ncuti angry as a Doctor. We saw him indignant in Boom, but I don't think he was angry. He didn't lose his temper. He loses his temper briefly here. And then I realised this has an additional layer to it, because the first time the Doctor's been angry and black. That's different, because the idea of, it's, the stereotype of black people showing anger or trying to repress anger. I mean, we got the whole Key and Peele anger translator sketches out of it. The idea that you can't be too angry if you're black, and how it does mean some people may react to you differently in that way. So it was very notable that this is the first time he's lost his temper. And it's not something we should sleep on, the idea of the Doctor being both angry and black. And I suspect as well, the anger is obviously that someone's died, and Kate looked like she blamed him, and the Doctor probably blames himself. But it also felt, when I think of the series and the way the Doctor's been since the Bi-Generation, of the Doctor thinking, no, it should have been different this time. This stuff shouldn't be happening anymore because I've, quote unquote, fixed myself. We did the therapy the wrong way around. So I am more upbeat. I am more optimistic. I smile a lot more. I'm more open to romance. I imagine the doctor probably thinks after every regeneration, this time I'll get it right. No one's going to die this time. And once again, it's happened. And I suspect there's a bit of a frustration of, oh shit, it's the same problem again. And even with the scene, we haven't mentioned, I thought it was a very good scene, the scene that he has with Kate.
But he never, ever mentioned a granddaughter.
I was a different doctor back then, Kate. Great enigma. Still can't shake it off. I'm trying.
If you've got a granddaughter, that means you've got kids.
Well, not quite. Not yet.
But you mean you can have a granddaughter before a daughter?
Life of a Time Lord.
The idea that the Doctor is at some way trying to shake off the past incarnations. Some aspects of those past incarnations, it might have been healthy to be that way.
Russell seems very interested in sort of that mental health message of, for instance, you look at, the 12th Doctor, like somebody dies and he kind of just like tamps it down. He kind of says, I have to focus on the goal. I can't really spend time mourning this person right now. And probably with Ncuti being the kind of actor that he is, and also the kind of way that Russell can pick up on that, he's written this Doctor as being very emotionally open, where he loses one person and he's extremely upset about it and shows that emotion rather than bottled up. He's very much able to express that in a way that in past incarnations he wouldn't have been able to do that. And I think that's a good message, whether it's sadness or anger or whatever. I mean, people talk about the Doctor cries a lot in this season. I think part of it is just Ncuti is very much into the moment of it, and I don't think it feels forced, but also it's the way the Doctor is in this incarnation too, that he's much more open to that emotional side.
As much as people saying he's crying too much, well, he's laughing more than he's ever laughed before, but we don't really punish people for laughing.
Exactly.
Because we've spoken about this, and it has been spoken about a lot over the past few weeks, but these were things that we were kind of, in our analysis and what we were trying to figure out from watching the show, we kind of have to do that because 2 days from before this recording, Rosalind Silkas was writing a piece in the New York Times where she interviewed Ncuti and Russell separately about this incarnation, and they basically kind of said a lot of the things you've said, Chris. So we're not even making an educated guess anymore. Right. It's a piece in the New York Times. It's available online. I don't know, just Google, I guess, Doctor Who New York Times or Ncuti Gatwa New York Times or whatever. It's like June the 15th, the pieces. But I have retweeted it from our Twitter Analyzing DW. So if you scroll back a bit, you'll probably find it there as well. All of this stuff was there in this performance, and it felt, leveling up's not the right word. That wouldn't be fair to what we've seen up to this point. It felt there was increased precision in Ncuti's performance, and that just comes from being familiar. Being the Doctor is like learning a language, and we saw Ncuti become a lot more fluent on Saturday. Okay, so yes, if you have any thoughts on what we've just said, you can email us at analysingdoctorwho@gmail.com. It's analysing spelled with an S. We're also available on YouTube, and we're on Twitter and Instagram at analysingdw. So Ken, Chris, thank you for both being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great discussion. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, and thank you for listening. And as there's only one episode left, we'll be slightly slowing down our recording schedule a touch. So we'll be back in around 2 to 3 weeks to analyse Empire of Death. Until next time. Our logo is courtesy of Scott Mattison. His work can be found at planetrisecreative.com and on Twitter at planetrise. Our theme tune is by Mike Mould. We can be reached at analysingdoctorwho@gmail.com and on Twitter at analysingdw.